Chapter 8. The next day was about as upbeat as any day after. As in not. A landscape of pale faces, blurry, bloodshot eyes, and foreheads pitted with question marks as far as the eye could see. Tennis, anyone? I was feeling remarkably chipper considering. The babe decided to stay on for a while and trip the light fandango a little longer. I gave her a smooch and took my free ride home, sipping a cold beer and listening to Freddie and Woody spark and spar as they assailed the walls of Jericho. Life wasn't so bad. When I got home, I checked the integrity of my various and sundry audio and vid recordings, listened to my messages, put in a few hours on the horn, took care of my internet imperatives, and called my heartthrob down in Brazil. The night had surreptitiously fallen, and the hair of the dog beckoned. I was hoping that Ava was recovering and not reindulging as I readied myself to go down to Pat's, my local Irish filling station, and have a couple of Guinness nightcaps. Switching off the lights, the shadows of 2 feet in a wide stance framed by the light that shone from beneath my door became immediately apparent. A precision dive behind the couch as a 12-gauge roared, ripping a 2-foot hole through the door. A swift, powerful kick, and he was in. Grabbing the spare .45 that's always strapped under my couch, I inhaled deeply. Crouch, aim, fire. 6 rounds went off in rapid succession in the general direction of my entranceway and the gargantuan, shadowy figure therein framed. Holding my breath and waiting, heart pounding plenty, my would-be assassin hit the floor with a voluminous thud, followed by moaning and gurgling sounds. Whoever it was seriously fucked up, no doubt. When the sounds had finally ceased, I got up cautiously, turning on the lights, weapon at ready, adrenaline charged and pure animal. There was Biggie lying across the threshold, 280 pounds of dead weight in a pool of his own blood. A few minutes passed and the sirens were already getting close. Why was Biggie after me? I was all paid up. It didn't smell right. All my senses were on high alert. The whispered, nervous breathing, rustling paraphernalia, and determined, hushed footsteps of the trigger-happy popo coming down the hall were clearly audible. I could smell their sweat by the time I placed my gat on the floor in front of me, well out of arm's reach. Got on my knees with my hands behind my head and reluctantly waited for the inevitable smackdown. An adrenaline-pumped Murphy, followed by a wary Gonzalez, entered my crib, guns raised, almost tripping over Biggie's massive blood-soaked body and slipping in the still widening blue-black pool. When they recognized me, they relaxed a little and made me get on the floor and cuffed me behind my back without any of the rough stuff. Once I was standing, Gonzalez says, "What the fuck are you into now, West? The chief ain't gonna like it one bit. This is the second time that you plugged somebody this year." "Yeah, but the other guy lived." "Shut the fuck up," a ceremoniously unamused Murphy said with an authoritarian bark. It was a quiet ride to the station. Had to call my lawyer, and he wasn't going to like it either. Joe Fields, my counselor at law and longtime friend, posted my bail the next day out of the emergency fund, which was now close to empty. My hands were still shaking a little. I needed a drink bad. Joe was livid, driving me home, mumbling, "What the fuck, Nick? What the fuck? What the fuck?" "Relax, Joe. It was self-defense." That pissed him off even more. I should have never used the R word. What was I thinking? Man, did I have questions for Manny, but he wasn't picking up. What the fuck was up with that? He always picked up, even if he was shitting, shaving, or showering. I decided to call Slick Rick, a detective in the 17th Precinct, for whom I'd done more than my fair share of off-the-books reconnoitering. "Yeah, I heard about Manny." "You heard what about Manny?" "Somebody blew him away with a 12-gauge. I recounted my recent fatal and final encounter with Biggie. He whistled a downward glissando and said, "Well, Biggie's probably our perp then. You one lucky son of a bitch, dog." "What about Small?" "Seems like he's on the run. Probably never see him again. But we've got an APB out." He said he'd get back to me when he could, and hung up. Chapter 9. Small's real name was Leonard Slanimsky. He was a small, rotund man of 38 who'd been prematurely balding for the past 20 years. There wasn't much left on that thick skull of his, and there wasn't much inside of it for that matter either. He had the unkempt air and angst-ridden eyes of the perpetually sexually frustrated. God only knows the last time he'd gotten laid without paying for it, if ever. It was one of those faces that only a mother could love, and she'd probably never cared much for him either. He resembled a forlorn, anemic, younger, though somewhat taller version of Danny DeVito without any of the pizzazz. Sitting in the Memphis bus terminal, taxing his meager mental faculties to the point of near meltdown. He'd always known that Biggie's crack habit would eventually get the best of him, but what the fuck? The son of a bitch had gone ballistic and blown Manny away just because he'd complained about his coffee being cold. What the fuck? The crazy bastard had ruined everything they'd worked for. When he'd said he was going after that asshole West, he'd known that it was time to cut and run. Biggie was probably going to come after him next. And now here he was, back in Memphis after all these years. He didn't have a single connection, except for a half-sister that he hadn't seen in 8 years. He wasn't even sure that he'd recognize her. He didn't recognize her right away, even though she was basically a female version of himself. She, on the other hand, recognized her one and only sibling right off the bat, and roly-poly ambled up to him with a nonplussed expression front and center. "Hi, Lenny." "Hi, Shirley," he replied laconically, with the fatuous melancholy of a broke-dick dog. She'd changed from brunette to dirty blonde and had put on at least 40 pounds since he'd last seen her. Good thing he'd called her for Hanukkah last year, or she probably wouldn't have given him the time of day. She didn't ask any questions and proceeded to explain that she was willing to put him up for a while, but her life partner wasn't very keen on the idea. Wow, he thought. Now she's a fucking dyke. Hannah, Shirley's other half, was one butch piece of work. Crew cut, overalls, and none too happy to see him. He could sleep on the couch, but he'd have to pitch in at least $3 a month. That's a lot cheaper than a month of crummy hotels and greasy spoons, he thought, and accepted readily. He'd hit the pool halls the following day. Small was a very talented pool player and knew how to hustle. Back to square one, he thought. 5-0 was his main concern. He was going to have to keep his nose clean. Small was a survivor. Chapter 10. It was dawn when Ms. Morris revved the 390-horsepower fuel-injected monster engine of her baby blue 1964 Mercury Montclair. What a car! Quicksilver was purring like a saber-toothed tiger. We got out of the city in no time flat and headed west through Jersey. I've spent a good deal of time there, but it never would be high on my list of places to visit or live. Followed by Pensy. Then we were southwest bound at an average speed of 90 miles per hour. I kept my eyes on the radar detector, and the babe did her thing. Conversation was minimal for the first couple 100 miles. From time to time, she CB communicated with the occasional long-haul trucker, at which point I would lower our road trip soundtrack. I wasn't really supposed to leave the state, even though the Biggie incident was a clear-cut case of self-defense. I've never been known to live by the rules, and neither has the babe. So onward and upward toward our intertwined destinies we cruised. We started to discuss the Earl Sloan situation over a brunch of pancakes and eggs. Ava knew the part of town that harbored Earl's last known residence and where all the nearest truck stops were. She went on to explain that it was one of the roughest white trash neighborhoods in the state. Everybody packed, everybody had a chip the size of a boulder on their shoulder, and belligerent hillbilly meth-smoking Reb flag-waving beyond bad attitudes to boot. We would have to tread lightly to be sure. After an uneventful evening at a funky-ass crumb-bum motor inn outside of Marion, Virginia, and an 8-hour drive, we rolled into Memphis right before rush hour on day 2 of our 1,000-mile road trip. The Breeze Inn Motel just on the outskirts of town seemed like the logical choice for a low-profile sojourn. We once again took separate rooms. This wasn't time for any hanky-panky, you dig. We had to stay focused. I rented a nondescript pickup truck while the babe stayed at the hotel and got ready to do her potluck truck stop investigation. When I got back, she was showered, primped, and ready for action. It was time to discuss our battle plan. We decided that she'd hit all the truck stops she could think of, while I nosed around Sloane's old neighborhood. We'd meet back at the hotel round midnight. I replaced the rental plates with some bogus North Carolina plates I'd brought along just for the occasion, and called my buddy Laramie at the Memphis Sheriff's Department. I announced that I was in town playing it low-key for the moment and asked him if he'd dug up any new dirt on Sloane. He told me Sloane was in town and to watch my back. I wondered whether Earl had found the wacky weed yet. Ava told me that she'd packed it at the bottoms of 3 trunks containing books, and that they had been loaded first, making them virtually inaccessible until the rig was fully unloaded. So we still had a fighting chance, but I was going to have to get the jump on him. I started slipping into character and rehearsing my new identity in my mind. Cowboy hat by my side and gat locked and loaded under the seat. Mick Evans, contractor from Charlotte, North Carolina, as I crossed town, headed for Trailer Park Heaven. Ms. Morris pulled her budget rental. No way she was going to put her valiant steed Quicksilver in harm's way. Into the first truck stop on the list and proceeded to talk up the truckers at the counter, who were more than willing to listen to anything Blondie had to say, even though she dressed way down and wasn't wearing any makeup. Once a knockout, always a knockout. After ascertaining that no one knew her cousin Earl, or at least that no one was letting on, she moved on to truck stop B, with similar results. Feeling a little peeved and frustrated, thinking that bum had her life's possessions and a righteous bundle of primo bud to boot, she headed for truck stop C. There were 3 more on her list. Sitting in a booth nursing her coffee, she realized that the place was almost empty, and that the few people there hadn't even paid any attention to her since the waitress had brought her coffee. She was daydreaming. Sadness and consternation were accruing in equal parts, and her blood had just begun to boil at the thought of her pointedly precarious predicament, when Earl slovenly slithered into the booth right beside her and said, "I heard you was looking for me." "Yeah, that's right, Earl. Where's all my fucking stuff?" He stuck a .38 caliber snub nose into her ribs just below table level and said, "Why don't you and me step outside and have a little talk, sweet cheeks?" The babe was scared shitless, but didn't let on. She just got up and walked out to face the music.